I feel very privileged to have discovered Jean Rollin when I was pretty young, and I'll never forget how this movie Grapes of Death, how it really blew me away with that sentimental story, this strong gore, and that beautiful score and the eye-full locations. An amazing film. Grapes of Death is easily the most accessible Jean Rollin film out there. It had quite a good, healthy distribution history. It wasn't lost or obscure at any point. There is a number of editions, and it's a damn fine film. But surprisingly, Jean Rollin himself had reservations about it up to a point, as it was his probably most expensive production. It cost something like about 1 million old French francs to make. Jean Rollin didn't have 100% artistic control over the movie, so the backers imposed certain plot points on him. Although Rollin scripted the movie, he was not able to just follow his wild artistic whims as he would have done with his earlier self-funded movies. So in some ways, Grapes of Death is a bit more straight-laced. And it's a fantastic horror film. It's probably France's first gore movie. The great thing about it is that there is a dynamic to this movie. My complaint about Jean Rollin, whose movies I love, is that he's not always in control of the movie's pacing. And in this way, Grapes of Death really stands out as it really... It has quite a simple but robust story structure. So we begin with this, after the opening credits, we are set on this, the opening, when we're introduced to the main characters, it's set on a train. It's one of the most beautiful, I love scenes set on moving trains. I love those in movies like George Romero's Martin, or in Mario Bava's Hatchet for the Honeymoon, or Jess Franco's Diabolical Dr. Z. All those movies, if there is a cool train scene, I love those. And The Grapes of Death has a really beautiful scene where we're introduced to our protagonist, and she's riding the train through this mountainous area of France, and she's on holiday. It's winter, and there is this beautiful light shooting through the windows as the train passes through the woods. It's amazing. And we learn that she's traveling to join her fiance at this vineyard somewhere in France. The thing is, there is this decaying guy who we saw in the opening credits sequence, who was the tractor driver at the vineyard, and he seems to have developed a rash, and it seems to be developing, growing very rapidly, and he's becoming unhinged, and he attacks the protagonist's companion, the other girl who was with her on the train. And this is just the opening scenes of Grapes of Death. So we start with this serene train ride, two happy girls talking about the holidays, and then this is all violently shattered when this figure stranger busts in. And this is a great way to set the story in motion. So our protagonist, I think her name might be Marie in the movie, I can't really remember. She pulls the stop thing, the emergency brakes, and she runs out of the train. The interesting thing about Grapes of Death is technically it's a zombie movie, but these are some unusual zombies, because they are not just killing machines and mindless. They are actually these pathetic creatures. As they become zombified, as they're exposed to these pesticides, right? And what happens is it kind of affects their nervous system in a way that they go after their loved ones and murder them and hurt them horribly, and then they seem to regain their consciousness for a bit, and they become overcome with remorse. And this is the interesting thing. You see this pattern throughout the movie. So these crazy guys, it's a bit like Romero's The Crazies, where it's slowly affecting their mind, and depending, some people it's quicker, some people it's a bit more gradual. But there is this great dramatic thing there with when the killers come to their senses and realize, oh, what have I done? So a lot of pathos in Grapes of Death comes in those scenes. So our protagonist, she's fled from the train and she's now lost in the countryside. And that footage Roland got in the wintry mountains, I forgot the name of the region. I think it's somewhere like more in the southern part of France, Occitan or somewhere like that. And there are those absolutely just mind-blowing, beautiful views of those hills and rocky formations as she wanders around completely lost. And she's wearing those, she has those really uncomfortable shoes, and you can see her, I can't imagine how the actress avoided breaking an ankle or something, because those shoes really look terribly uncomfortable. She has to run around all those rocks and things. So she then goes on her in search of help, really, but the thing is, everyone she encounters in the area, which is a rural area, seems to be affected, seems to be mad. So it's an escalating series of events where she keeps looking for somebody who could help her get to her fiancé, rejoin her fiancé at the vineyard. But everyone around her is just massacring each other. So it's actually a very simple story, but it's solid and it works so much better than many of Roland's more poetic movies, where the characters don't really have a goal. So in this movie, the character has a goal, and we're with her because she's proactive. It's also another case of Roland centering the story around a resourceful female protagonist. I mean, she's so cool. I mean, she actually fends for herself really well. She knows how to drive a car. She knows how to shoot a gun. She even she can hold her own in a cat fight. So I really thought this was a cool character. But she's also emotional. She's not like tough, numb kind of character. She's also very much affected by all the horror she's exposed to when she sees all the suffering around her. So it's a really great protagonist to root for, because she's clearly got a vulnerable side, but she's also not a victim, and she will not let herself get killed off so quickly. One of the things I really appreciate about this movie, Grapes of Death, is the score. I forgot the composer's name because it's a different name is credited depending on which source you consult. And it's quite a different score from earlier Roland movies. It doesn't have any of that psychedelic rock or experimental jangling music. It's more of a very minimalist keyboard, pulsating sort of music, and it really adds this layer of dynamic again to the scenes, where it elevates quite a grim story onto this more fairy tale plane, because it's a little bit like the music in George Romero's Day of the Dead, where it's this keyboard music which sounds quite light, and somehow it works really well in this eerie zombie context, and I thought this worked really well in Grapes of Death. You gotta mention the gore. Grapes of Death, the first time I saw it, I remember being really impressed. Even before watching the movie, I remember reading about the movie, seeing the stills. There is that iconic midway through the film, this poor girl ends up like beheaded with an axe. And it's a pretty graphic effect for 1978, and it's nicely done with prosthetics, so holds up really well today. When it comes to the cast, I think I recognize just one actor in this movie. There are these two kind of tough peasant farmer guys who drive around in the truck and throw dynamite sticks at the zombies, so they're like the duo of survivors, and one of them is played by this guy who I remember from a black and white art house French movie, Elevator to the Gallows it's called. from Louis Malle. I think that was Louis Malle's debut film. It's a beautiful black and white film with the score by none other than Miles Davis. And this guy shows up in a secondary supporting part in like a Jean Rollin zombie movie at the end of the 1970s. I mean, Grapes of Death came out the same year as Dawn of the Dead, 1978. So we cannot know for sure, was it informed, was it influenced by Dawn of the Dead? But what we do know is that the producers explicitly told Roland to emulate certain key scenes of Romero's Night of the Living Dead. And this is something, when you watch the movie, it becomes a bit more apparent, because the zombies, like I said, they're sentient zombies. They still got the soul, so in a way they're like human monsters, right? But in the middle, like there is this big climatic scene in the village at night, where there is a larger bunch of zombies, not individual ones, but there is like a group of them, maybe a dozen. And this is where they switch. They stop moving around like normal human beings, which they used to do throughout the movie. Now they all suddenly go into Romero mode, where they're kind of stumbling around, and they actually do this typical, typical zombie walk even. And not so well at that. So this was very jarring to me. Always when I watched the film, I was wondering, why is this inconsistency? But now that I've learned that it was probably imposed by the financial backers, okay, that makes a bit more sense. Another really cool thing about Grapes of Death is it's an outdoors movie, similar in some ways to the classic Spanish zombie film Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, Breakfast at Manchester Morgue, which came out 3 or 4 years before Grapes of Death. I mean, both of them, unlike Romero's original black and white movie, they take their characters outside the confines of a closed space, and they let them roam the countryside. And I love both of those films because Manchester Morgue shows the beauty of like the big district, and Grapes of Death shows the beauty of the mountainous area in the south of France. So they're really nice to look at, and both of those films share those kind of environmentalist concerns, which obviously have not lost any relevance up to nowadays. So the source of contamination in Grapes of Death being this pesticide, which makes its way into wine. And one of the things I really appreciate about Grapes of Death is that it isn't as avant-garde as some of Roland's earlier films. So it's a very good, solid introduction to his films for a more casual viewer. If somebody is new to the filmmaker Jean Roland, they could safely bet on Grapes of Death as a great test movie, because it's a lot less crazy than his other films, but it still retains the director's vision. Like the way he directs and frames actors is very much typical of him. So he has those kind of marvelous close-ups, really, really beautiful close-ups. And then there are quite long scenes where there is just people walking around. The interesting parallel I caught also between Grapes of Death and Fascination is that both movies start with our protagonist fleeing from danger until he reaches some kind of a presumed safe haven. And in both of these films I mentioned, he passes a bridge, kind of symbolically, kind of going across from more conventional world into this more Jean Roland fantastique world. And this is very interesting because in Fascination he crosses this kind of old bridge over the moat to reach the castle, and in Grapes of Death we see our protagonist run across this modern, maybe it's like a railway bridge or something with those, I forgot the name of those ribs. There is a special a name for that type of bridge, trusses, I'm not sure. And it just struck me that this was something, a bit of a parallel between otherwise quite dissimilar movies. I think Jean Rollin, had he stuck to this mode of filmmaking, had he sacrificed some of his artistic whims and invested more in more traditional type of story, he could have gained more exposure. His films could have been probably more successful in the long run, but I don't think that was something Jean Rollin was comfortable with. So Grapes of Death actually stands out as his probably only film with a quite elaborate action scene and a good number of locations and one or two actors who can be considered decent actors, even though the supporting parts are still just Jean Rollin's friends. You can see some actors you recognize from his other movies, from Living Dead Girl or from Lips of Blood. I think one of the producers of Lips of Blood, which was not a financial success, also participated in putting up the money for Grapes of Death, which was, I believe, a modest success in France. It did okay business in the provinces and it played for a few weeks in Paris. So that was probably the highlight of Jean Rollin's career. Why did he even accept Grapes of Death? Apparently, he hasn't done a proper movie in like something going on 5 years up to that point. And he was just making those naughty films to pay his way. And when he was approached about Grapes of Death, about making Grapes of Death, he was not so keen on zombie films, but he really wanted to break away from the adult cinema and once again try his hand at a fantastic film, at something more akin to what he dreamt of making. And this is why he accepted all those limitations imposed by the film's backers. Grapes of Death is probably the most underrated 1970s zombie film I can think of. To this day, I mean, occasionally I meet some French movie fans and I talk to them and we end up talking about anything, Giulio Questi or Fulci or Jess Franco, but when I bring Jean Rollin up, I don't think Jean Rollin's name even resonates so much in France, because I think he oddly got his fans thanks to video and DVD in the 90s, first of all in the UK and then in the late 90s in the States. So he really remains a very much underappreciated and obscure figure till this day, like a decade. It's been like a decade since he died. Check out Grapes of Death if you've never seen it. You won't regret it. It's a packed film. I would give it 10 for atmosphere. I would give it 7 for gore. I would give it probably 6 for acting and story. And normally in Jean Rollin's movies I would give it like 0 or 1 for acting and story, and I would give it like 20 for atmosphere, So this is like a more balanced one, where it's a lot easier to get into Jean Rollin by starting with movies like Living Dead Girl or Grapes of Death, or even Zombie Lake, which of course was not his artistically ambitioned project, but it was like just a bread and butter movie he signed just to pay his bills. But those movies still are easier to embrace, I think, for a casual viewer than his earlier more experimental vampire films.